of the Board of Lane County Commissioners. We have a good agenda this afternoon, starting with a 1:30 time certain. So, Mr. Mokrahajski, if we're all ready to go, I will begin with the item 12A under County Administration, which is a presentation and discussion order 22-04-26-08 in the matter of adopting the 2022-2024 Lane County Strategic Plan. And Mr. Mokrahajski, today you have a panel that includes Ms. Judy Williams. I'll turn it over to you to introduce your panel.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners, and I'll just make a couple of introductory comments to say that this is, I believe, Strategic Plan 3.0, version 3.0, since about 2015, when we really began engaging with the board in defining the strategic priorities that the board and the community and our organization desired to achieve, and focusing our efforts with the limited resources and limited staffing we have available to really focus our efforts around what is most important ultimately to the board as the representation of the community's priorities. And so I want to just, thank Judy Williams, our strategy and integration manager, for shepherding this process that has been a lengthy process over the course of nearly a year, in our partnership with Barry Dunn, and our engagement with our employees and with the community to seek feedback, that we have not done this work in isolation, but rather in partnership with stakeholders and the people in our organization, our community that we rely on to support the important work that we're seeking to do. So thank you to everyone who has participated and been involved in this work. And I just want to, sort of set the stage for what is really important about having a strategic plan in government, in local government, is keeping our eye on the ball, is this the level of focus that it brings to our work that we certainly have seen over the last couple of years can be chaotic and focused on emergencies and crises, because those are the urgent things that happen. And now is the time for us to refocus our work to make sure that as we come out from these emergencies and these crises, that we maintain a level of commitment in doing what is important for our community, but that we also recognize we can't do all things because we won't be very effective at all of our work. So what do we want to really focus on achieving? So that's the point of having our strategic plan. I've been pleased with the process to date, and thank the board for your engagement and continued support of identifying your priorities and your goals that you seek for us to achieve. I've used this analogy with each of you in sort of very generally and broadly defining the role of commissioners versus the role of staff, and very simplistically that, it's the commissioners are the passengers in the bus and the staff are the drivers of the bus. And what that means is, you need to tell us where you want to go. You get to decide what the end result is, where you want our community, our organization, what you want us to focus on. We will then find the most efficient and effective route to get you to that destination, but we're relying on you. The community and our organization is relying on you to tell us what direction you want to head. So I appreciate the engagement and support of the commissioners throughout this process. So Judy, I'll turn it over to you and our team here to walk through the update and look for the board's comments and ultimate approval.
Thank you very much, Steve. And good afternoon, Commissioners, Chair. I'm Judy Williams, the Strategy and Integration Manager here at the county. And as the County Administrator mentioned, have been helping to facilitate this process with our consultants as well. And so we have with us Michelle Kennedy. I believe there's just an invite glitch. And so it says Tara Warney-Griggs, but we have Michelle Kennedy with us from Barry Dunn. We also have Dr. Tara Warney-Griggs as well, who is a consultant working with Barry Dunn, providing kind of equity expertise to our process. So I'm going to go ahead and begin, and I can assume that you are seeing the slides okay. Perfect. Okay. So the brief overview for today. So we've planned about a 25-minute presentation for you, and then left about 35 minutes for questions, conversations, any other additional thoughts as well. So today, the plan is really to briefly go over the purpose. You heard from County Administrator Mokrahejski a little bit on the purpose, the history as well. So breezing through that, talking about the process that we took on, the engagement and survey results just briefly, and then talking a little bit about our brainstorming process. So how did we get to where we're at now? And then finally, working through some of the slides at that high level of what are those plans or what are those goals, priorities, and some of those objectives under each of those, as well as addressing the performance measures and next steps. So that's what we're bringing for you today. Briefly, and County Administrator Mokrahejski spoke to this too, but it's really, why, trying to start the conversation with why are we working on a strategic plan? What's the importance of purpose? And it's really, having that alignment as an organization, having a future destination for us to work towards. So there's kind of 2 or 3 elements in why, and it's really having that alignment, having that high level of framework identified. One, to help us prioritize, to know, as County Administrator Mokrahejski always mentions, that we can't do all things to all people and do it well. So truly trying to identify what are those priorities, when is a good time to do some of these right things and in what order, and really spelling that out so that we know and we have that alignment. And then lastly, for our employees and for the organization, so that we are all under the understanding of what are the goals, what's the destination, what is our purpose together as an organization, and where are we headed? So, a good quote that I often go back to is just really that from JFK, our efforts and courage are not enough without purpose and direction. Just listing a couple of those accomplishments, and I'll touch on the history too, but when we've done strategic plans well, and when we've put that purpose out there, we've really tried to help address some key accomplishments. And those are to rebuild partnerships when and where needed, regain trust, bringing clarity to the organizations. There's many, as I'll walk through some of the history of our plans. We're focused on different things at different times for a variety of reasons. We've used the strategic plans to improve our wellness and efforts and initiatives, our equity efforts as well, improving our financial management, really having that goal of where do we want to be and how can we strive to get there. And then addressing the affordable housing aspect. There's much more to do on that, and had a great presentation earlier today on implementing that. So these are just a few highlights that I wanted to touch on. Also, we spoke briefly earlier just on some of the other plans. So, early on, maybe in the 2012, 2017 plan, again, as there's different times to focus on different efforts for different reasons. And in 2012, when we adopted that plan, there were really 5 major things that we were going to be working on as an organization. And it was just limited to those 5 kind of SMART goals. And then in those early years, there was just a lot of changes in our organization, a lot of involvement or issues with leadership. We had gone through a process, and ultimately the board had, fired the county administrator at the time. There was a lot of repair that needed to be to work on. So we knew that we needed to start fresh. So when we did have Steve Mokrahejski come to Lane County, one of those first things was to start with a new strategic plan. And so really listening, gathering those thoughts, what do we need to work on? What's that kind of the environment, if you will, and how do we get there? So it's some of those earlier plans were really focused outward, community, rebuilding partnerships, regaining trust, and then really incorporating, as we've evolved our plans. It's been neat to watch, just how much we then incorporate internally too, and focusing it on our people, our organization as well. Just briefly on the process getting to this spot. So we started a year and a half ago with just kind of some early input from the commissioners. So I came to you in January of last year, looking at what would each of you as commissioners like to see in the process moving forward, as you've all been in many versions of a strategic plan and many efforts. The results of those conversations are really shaped where we're at today. And so the early input was really looking at an outside facilitator, when we can, having offsite meetings to get together to really, to hone in on what those priorities for each of us would be. It was pretty overwhelming that the comments were, we really liked the strategic plan we had. There wasn't a, let's scrap this and start all over, but it's a, let's see if we can go deeper, or can we take it to the next level. Additional comments were, really trying to plan for the future, but really honoring where we are and knowing, how raw people were at the time of a year and a half and now 2 years or so of some trying times. So just honoring that, focusing on input, focusing on equity, using an equity lens in the process, as well as data in this plan. And then finally, how can we incorporate department plans in our strategic plan and do that well? So we did a competitive process. We had an RFP, a request for proposals. We had about 14 proposals that came into us, scored those with a team effort, interviewed the top 3, and ultimately chose Barry Dunn to work with us in this process. We presented the approach to you as a board early on to see if there were any adjustments to that. And then we really launched in the fall of 21 to kick off the development, work on that engagement website and other opportunities for engagement as well. And at this time, I will turn it over to Michelle, and she will speak on the engagement efforts and some of the brief survey results as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Judy. And that was a good description of the process. I just want to thank everybody here today and acknowledge the amount of effort that went into this process. Community engagement for a strategic plan is really challenging. Members of the public tend to want to comment when something is wrong. It's harder, excuse me, for them to engage when something is right. And so what our goal is to offer more opportunities, different opportunities for people to participate in the process, and also to try to engage communities and populations that are harder to reach and that don't typically show up at the table. And those are tall orders, and the pandemic put an even different spin on all of that. Our firm is doing this work across the country, and we're trying to find new ways, different ways to engage people where they're at. The virtual platforms have helped in some cases, and in some cases, I think they have hindered a little bit because people are now not so sure about coming together in physical settings. And so we're learning. We're on a learning curve with community engagement, and we'll continue to work on and fine tune that. However, that said, we're really happy with the results that we got. So we did a separate employee survey that yielded phenomenal results. That's a 35% return. You have about 2,000 county employees. That's a great result for a survey for your workforce. And in a minute, we're going to show you the results lined up against what your external community stakeholders said and what your employees said, and they're very much in alignment. So that effort to engage your employees, not only just in a survey, but also input sessions where they could weigh in on the draft plan and what was in the draft plan and thoughts they had about how the county could be successful in implementing that plan was a really rich and fruitful discussion. There weren't high numbers of participation in that, but the conversation was really meaningful. And that is a really important point to make. When there is a qualitative input process, the degree of depth that you can go into in the level of conversation is incredibly important. The 2008 visits to the engagement platform is good. Not everybody that went there took the survey or made a comment, but they were interested enough to go there and see what was going on. And that is a high number. That's the highest number we have seen yet on a strategic planning engagement that's been conducted during the pandemic. So I think you should take that as a positive sign about how and what the county is doing to engage the public. And to be very candid, it's harder to engage an audience for a county government than it is for city government, because it's just one layer removed from where the action really happens for people and where the rubber hits the road. And so that's not a bad result that you had that much traffic to that site. There were 179 community survey responses. Again, it's a small number, but what we're not looking for a statistically valid sample on a project like this. We're looking for, what do we see in terms of alignment of thematic statements and responses across the different ways that we engage people. So we look for those commonalities between the interviews that we conduct, what people post on the social engagement platform, the survey data that we collect from employees and the community, and then any other comments that we receive while we're going through the process from the very beginning to the point that we are now. So we had 49 individual comments on the platform. We offered 7 community and employee forums. Again, the numbers weren't huge, but the quality of the input provided was very high. We did stakeholder interviews with 28 individuals, and then we had those final strategic plan draft input sessions. And then I'm going to move it now to Tara, who can talk about what we did and then the results of those actual engagement efforts.
Thank you, Michelle. It's great to see all of you again. I think, yeah, the quality of the feedback that we got was really fantastic, and really a strong consensus, I think, about what the priorities should be going forward. And so this is the community results, kind of ranking what people thought was the highest matters of concern or in need of attention first. And so affordable housing, clearly, public safety, so the sheriff's office, parole and probation, community health and well-being, and in the fall when we were doing these, there was still a lot of uncertainty about where it really in some ways still is uncertainty about where we were going to go with the pandemic. And then maintaining outdoor spaces. Those assets for Lane County are deeply prized by those that live there and visitors as well, but they're important. Creating a good business environment for local businesses are the kind of the top, 5 things. And then equity and inclusion is on there as well, one down. So if you want to go to the next slide, you'll see very similar sorts of things for employees. Highest on there is that pink bar, about 2/3 the way down, affordable housing. Then public safety is second again. The community health and well-being is third. I mean, there's really not, they mirror each other almost identically. So, and we found the same things in our qualitative data gathering as well. Very consistent and very thoughtful folks. I mean, you have a lot of great members of the community, stakeholders that are already working with you all on these kinds of issues and are keen to remain engaged. So I think, yeah, the level of clarity is always nice to have, right? I'll hand it back to Michelle.
Yeah, very much so. And here's the side by side that you're probably interested in seeing. As Tara mentioned, there's a high level of alignment. The top four are so clear. And this is a beautiful result from the standpoint that your county team of employees, leadership, the staff that do the work have their finger on the pulse of what is important to the community. Now, there's a couple of differences there. You know, you would imagine that the community would be very focused on divisiveness and also wildfire response and recovery, which is very still front and center in their minds. And what I'll say about that result is that the county got high marks from the community in terms of those we talked with, in terms of its response to that. So, you know, the staff may be thinking, wow, you know, we nailed it. You know we did a good job with that. And the community is still concerned about it because we know from where we live, there's more of that coming. So for the top four, totally in alignment, but not that off. And so I think the instructive part of this slide is to say, okay, let's make sure that in those areas that fall below the top four, we're really continuing our focus on either putting resources towards what the community perceives the needs are, or doing education around those things. And as you know, education can be done without a lot of resources, and sometimes that's all that's needed there. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to Judy because she's going to keep us moving, and we'll have plenty of time for questions.
Thank you, both Michelle and Dr. Warney-Griggs. I just wanted to leave this up for a quick second, and there's a link at the bottom that anybody could go to. The full results of both the community survey, the employee survey is out there on our website, where you could see. This is just a snippet of, 2 questions essentially. So there's a lot more detail that you have at your fingertips, one in Excel format with charts and graphs, and the other as well. So I wanted to put that out there. One other aspect too, as engagement was mentioned early on, one of our specific objectives in this plan, in the plan in front of you, is to do better with community engagement. And I think, just that reality of trying to work through a different environment as well, and meeting people where they are. But there is a particular focus, as I too, and many others have spoken to this too, of how can we do this better as well. And so really trying to strive to work with the community to help us with some of that effort. And I wanted to also take an opportunity to say, I have a few more slides, and then we'll walk through some of those priorities and objectives. There's also a lot of detail in the board packet and on the website as well. I didn't want to have 75 slides of all of that detail, but I will touch on some of those, but just know that there's more granular details as well in the packet. So in terms of where do we go next? So we've had some engagement this far in the process. We had a lot of input from a variety of sources. And again, even when we had a group of 5 people on a Zoom call, it was just really authentic, genuine conversations that we were having, and really creative ideas that came out of it. So how do we take all of this input, put it together, and work towards those next steps? What do we do with this information? So, really what I always kind of refer to as like the heart of the organization in the strategic plan is really that framework of what are those high level, the vision, mission, values, how do we envision our organization? Our vision that really should be that audacious goal. Lane County is the best county in which all can live, work, and play. It is aspirational. It's not something we can accomplish in the 3-year plan, but something that we strive to do, and that our employees know what we are striving to do in our community. Our mission is we responsibly manage available resources to deliver vital community-centered service with passion, drive, and focus. So really explaining that, what do we do, who do we do that for, and how. And then the values, These are our core beliefs as an organization, looking at integrity, excellence, equity, and respect. And all of these, which, and I'll go in a little bit more detail as well, but we've visited this as a leadership group and with the commissioners in that early retreat, and took a look at each one of these to see, do we need to adjust this? Is this a time to make some changes here? Let's walk through some of those. We had a minor word change in the vision of including all. So just really highlighting that inclusivity piece. We talked a lot about purpose here, improve lives. This has been our purpose since the creation of our last strategic plan. And it just really, after thorough conversation, it just really resonated with so many people that we didn't feel we needed to change this or adjust this is all. It really helps to tie everyone in our organization, no matter what job you do, what role you're in. We are all having that same similar purpose in improving lives for others in our community. The core behaviors, you've heard these behaviors, these are really, who do we have as employees? What types of behaviors do our employees represent, and who do we want to hire or recruit? Who do we want to bring to our organization? It's really those with the passion to serve, driven to connect, and focus on solutions. And then finally, our strategic lenses. While I say these are the heart of the organization, there's a lot of other detail in the plan, priorities, objectives that we'll touch on. But what are those kind of high level, we can't not do these things. And so while we have a mission, we do a lot of services at the county, these lenses just try and help elevate a framework of how do we look at things? How do we make decisions? We've done a lot more work on our equity lens to really hone in on what does that look like? What do we want to do with that? And how do we operationalize that? In our plan, there's specific objectives to really look at both the stewardship of resources lens, which encompasses financial resources and natural resources. And then there's the collective impact lens as well. And how do we operationalize that? So we have more work to do with these lenses, but we still feel like these are the ways that we can look through these lenses and ask questions so that we can make the best decisions possible with the most data and most informed choices in front of us. So we did walk through a lot of those to see if any other changes needed to happen. And we did some adjusting of the strategic lenses that as I mentioned, it used to just be financial stewardship, and we changed that to broaden the resources from financial and natural resources. With all of the additional input, so we have community input from surveys, from forums, from one-on-one conversations, interviews, employee input. We've had a lot of great input, leadership input as well in the retreats. And we just tried to get everything out there on the table of what do you want to see in the organization in the next few years? And what are we missing? What is different about the next few years that we haven't had in our plans before, and based on the needs and environment? And it really came down to lining lots of brainstorming sessions, but really trying to get back to how do we tease out what is missing? What are those gaps? And while we really felt safe and healthy county has been our priority, and we've really strongly felt like that was still important and valid to have that categorized as a priority. Vibrant communities as well, just really felt like that resonated. Robust infrastructure is also the same. The major change here in the priority is the last one. It used to be our people and partnerships. And while we truly depend on and support and honor the partnerships, we feel like that can be, it's really woven throughout our plan, but also in the collective impact strategic lens, that work. But we really felt, what is missing, and what we continue to hear over and over from employees, from the community is looking at internally too. So looking at financial health, looking at well-being of our people, looking at what's changed and what do we need to work on so that our organization can be as healthy as it can, so that we have people that are well cared for, that can do the services and provide the best service as possible. So those are the 4 priorities, or kind of the overarching priorities of the plan. And I'll walk through these somewhat briefly, but I want to pause and highlight a few others as well. I also, when we do have time, I have it pulled up and I can show additional detail as well. But we really, looking at the safe and healthy county priority, our first one, a lot of work went into back and forth and teasing out what are those goals that we have, and really trying to define it so that we know what we're striving to get in the end, those outcome goals. So it's develop an equitable and integrated approach to health, behavioral health, public safety, and homelessness so that all residents are safe, healthy, housed, and health outcomes are improved. And A here is really focusing on the people at that intersection. So we've done a lot of great work in the past and want to continue that too, of that intersection of behavioral health, homelessness, public safety, really looking at the crisis stabilization support, not only for the people and addressing the situation the best way, but also to help with the issue in our jails and the strain on jails as well. So B here is invest in public safety for improved service delivery. Some specific items under these. So accomplishing phase 2 of the Lane County Community Public Safety Repair Plan, actively pursuing a renewal of the 5-year public safety levy, and some additional advocate at the state and federal level for sustained funding for our critical public safety services. So trying to go into a little bit more detail on how do we get at these more critical objectives to achieve a goal. And again, as I said, there's many layers under these of tactics and strategies, but I want to briefly go through some of these so we have time at the end. C, invest in juvenile justice programs and adult supervision services. So working on uniting them as one so that both employees can thrive and the community can see that best, providing that best customer service. D, reduce the length of time people experience homelessness by adopting a best practices and strategies. So retooling a little bit of that work of what used to be the TAC and getting specifics and getting very specific objectives under that on how do we do that work to retool it to meet the needs. A couple more under safe and healthy county. E is really looking at prevention. So focusing on health promotion by providing equitable access to primary behavioral and dental health care and strategies to do that. Launching community partnerships to build capacity to support pandemic recovery and achieve health equity. And then finally, establish a traffic safety presence in combination with engineering and education to reduce traffic fatalities. So again, there's a lot of other layers under these, but really highlighting those as objectives. For vibrant communities, the goal here that we landed on was invest in Lane County residents by fostering engaged communities with affordable housing options, equitable opportunities, economic vitality, and a healthy environment. We really felt strongly, lots of feedback back and forth of how do we really unify all of these to really achieve that one goal, because there's so many aspects that you could do in any number one of these subject matters, but it's really how do we do it well and link everybody together. So A is increasing housing affordability, diversity, and supply. Much of what you heard today, those exact priorities that you heard in the presentation this morning are listed below in A, numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, specific objectives to, really get creative, working with financial institutions to get to move the needle, not just do the same thing, but how do we get additional revenue ideas? How do we work more strategically, effectively, so that we can get creative and bring more funding opportunities available, more home ownership opportunities available. So really exciting work there, and much of what you heard this morning. B, there's a lot in here, and I'm going to pause and try and capture some of these as well. Focus on that intersection of economic development, equity, and the environment as we look to achieve viable, fair, and a livable community. And again, while at one point we parsed each of these out and really had, let's have some strategies under economic development. Let's have some strategies under the environment. And then we just really continue to go back to that interconnectedness of them, while they do also have specific objectives for each. Just very briefly, some of the items under B are, implement economic strategies, including business retention and expansion, entrepreneurial growth, capital access, workforce support, enhance and expand the community benefits program, implement pilot program of capital building projects to inform countywide procurement policy that aligns with the climate action plan and our equity goals. Enhance and standardize data collection to inform and advance our equity work as an organization in order to provide equitable services to the community. Implement and operationalize the climate action plan. So while there's several other specifics, we really try to link to those enabling plans that are, work in concert with what we're already working on, but also what are we striving to continue to do. C, evaluate a multi-use community facility with the Eugene Emeralds baseball team as an anchor tenant. Some of that work, again, some specifics under that to really just do that evaluation, look into that further. D, again, we're in vibrant communities still, but this is here where I mentioned earlier, build our relationships with community groups to proactively expand opportunities for equitable and inclusive civic engagement. A lot of work here, and I think as we work with the community, we will see additional bullet points under here on how we need to do that. E, focus and support rural communities. So how do we all understand as much as we can the services that we provide as an organization, so that when one person is out in a community, we can help share information of what another department might be doing or another service that's available to the public, but really focusing on effectively planning to best to do that. And then F, this was added after some of the initial conversations from the board as to what we were hoping to see as well. So we added invest in the land management division and ensure adequate and sustainable staffing levels and resources are available to be both responsive and agile in meeting current and future housing needs and customer expectations. So knowing that we've seen changes with housing bubbles, housing busts, and how that impacts land management and how it has in the past, and trying to stay ahead of that while focusing on customer service as well. A couple more slides. Robust infrastructure. In here, our goal is maintain and invest in resilient infrastructure that creates the highest return for safety, community connectivity, enjoyment of life, and local economic success. Really capturing the broadband work and the needs here. So expanding access to affordable broadband. B, advance our ability to access and share data. So how do we do it well as an organization, across departments, and also with our partners, and address the safety and privacy needs. C, build a culture of preparedness. We've gone through the last couple of years and have a lot of great tools and tips. So how do we take that and now be as prepared as we can with the best plans, actions, and policies and procedures as well to develop any of those like disaster recovery plans as well. E, invest in our infrastructure and utilize our county-owned facilities to the highest and best use in order to have safe, usable infrastructure for years to come. Several of the pieces under here are really looking at how do we use our capital improvement plan, continue to use that best to the ability to plan for, look for grants, look for other opportunities. How do we use the equity lens? How do we use the stewardship of resources and look at the climate and sustainability aspects of our facilities. F, under robust infrastructure, this also was added after the last board conversation too. And what we felt was missing was, how do we address the other services that we do that may not be called out in this plan, but are very critical and key to the work that we do at the county. So assessment and taxation, for instance, or elections, all of these other kind of core services, supporting core services in order to deliver high quality, dependable and consistent customer service. So trying to really honor that, knowing that we need to continue to support, advance, look at additional technology and so forth. And in our final priority, a couple more bullet points. So this is the one that changed a little bit at most. Again, the overarching priority, and it's really exciting to bring in the organizational health aspect, in my opinion. But the goal here is really invest in our employees who are the backbone of our organization, and invest in the systems and organizational health so that employees can thrive and residents can experience a more effective government. So looking at all aspects of what we do, how can we do it best? What have the last couple of years been like for many people, and trying to encompass that. A is implement opportunities to improve employee well-being and promote a positive workplace culture with purpose and potential. A couple of the aspects I just will quickly highlight under this one is, for one, just, rolling out the strategic plan and emphasizing that clarity there, looking at strategies to improve not just workload capacity, but mental, physical, and financial components of wellness. Exploring long-term childcare options for our workforce. Continue to advance flexibility in policies and practice as we explore a new normal in workplace environments. B, advance an inclusive, diverse, and equitable workforce in order to shift the culture around equity. A lot of great additional work here, and thank you to Ms. Amato, who you heard from earlier today, just really tried to push us a little bit farther in some of our equity goals to really not just do the things and check off the list, but how do we look at shifting that culture? C, continue our path to increase our financial stability, our overall financial health, but also looking at continuous quality improvement. So looking at, honoring the change of the federal, state, additional dollars, and how do we manage that kind of one-time infusion most strategically, but also how do we leverage grant opportunities? How do we make the most of this? How do we look at revenue ideas? How do we look at enhancing revenue for some of not only just our core services, but for the day-to-day work that we do, and link that with pursuing legislative priorities that emphasize needed repairs or enhancements to systems. D is build and align capacity for our internal services at an effective and consistent level with other areas of an organization. This one, heard kind of loudly from several employees, but just really in every aspect of not just if it's just your program or your department or the whole organization, but looking at where growth has happened and how there might be inconsistencies, and knowing that not just growth, but as we expand, as we contract, as we have some shifts in what programs might align best, how do we provide that best, effective, efficient level of service and address capacity? And then finally, assess our needs, resources, and deficiencies in order to fulfill the goals outlined in the strategic plan. So while it's nice to have all of these items, it's nice to have them and say them, and this is what we're doing, but how do we really look at, is this achievable? What are the barriers in front of us? What can we do to address those so that we can implement these priorities? And then I won't go through these, but I just wanted to show you, I know it came up last time of how do we incorporate performance measures? These are nearly final, but I think in our first quarterly update, we'll really have a better sense of how these are working as we apply them. But for each priority, we have several performance measures listed so that we can link it back to the outcome goal to see, are we meeting the overall goal or not, or where do we retool and shift. So thank you for the time and for the extra time to kind of walk through some of those. I know I went a little bit over. Some of the next steps would be ultimate, if the board is willing, we have a board order in the board packet to potentially adopt a plan. Work well in our organization with like a one-pager or summary of where we headed. So working on creating those communication pieces so that we can talk about this well, communicate this well, look at tracking mechanisms. How do we set this up so we can have a really good scorecard that you can actively and at any moment see where we're making progress. And then our first quarterly update would be in July that we're proposing to look at April, May, June. How are we doing with these priorities and reporting on those on a regular basis? So again, this isn't a one-time final, this is it, and this will never change. This is really truly a living document we did our best to incorporate all of the feedback we heard. Things will change over time. This is a 3-year plan. And so we do also typically look at it annually and say, are there some changes that we need to incorporate that as well? And then finally, I'll turn it over to you, commissioners, but I just wanted to also echo the thanks that's already been said as well, of just from the community, from those that participated, businesses, the community stakeholders, employees, our leadership teams, anyone and everyone that came to the forums that we had, to you, the commissioners, directors. It's been, my job and Barry Dunn is really kind of that messenger of putting the words on the paper that are coming forward. And so it's nice to be in this spot to present this to you as we feel like this really represents where we think we should be headed based on what we heard. And I will turn it back over to you, Chair, for any questions or feedback. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Williams. Thank you, Judy, for abbreviating what is a pretty in-depth 10-page document included in our board packet. You did a good job of summarizing things. I personally am really very satisfied with the result. And I'd like to say one of the main reasons I'm satisfied, Ms. Kennedy, is because of what you stated, that no matter which forum you used and how you asked the questions, everybody more or less agreed on the direction and the outcome that you boiled it down to in the strategic plan. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the board for questions. We are scheduled to move to our next agenda item in about 12 minutes, but you know what? Don't worry about going over, because this is a good and an important issue. So I'm looking to the queue right now and seeing nobody in the queue. You're in danger of hearing me speak more. That usually spurs people to raise their hand. Then I will, as we wait for the queue, there may be no queue. I'll state that I've been involved in strategic plans on a number of different levels. We all have. Everybody in this room has been involved in strategic plans on a number of different levels. For me, in private industry, in financial, with Salco, in nonprofit, and now with government on this particular series of plans. And the process is very, very similar. And you hope that the outcome is going to be very, very similar to the document that you produced for us today. So with that, I see nobody rushing to the queue. Commissioner Burney.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to preface my remarks by saying I have nothing but admiration for our CAO, for Judy Williams, for our staff. I've worked with you for several years now, and I think you've been sterling. And I'm sure that Barry Dunn does this a lot, and that's how you make money for this division of your company, and I get that. It's always easier to agree with something presented, but I'm going to disagree with a couple of items and raise some concerns. And I know that's unexpected, and I apologize. The CAO will remember when I was chair last year, and we were, and the year before when Commissioner Buck was chair, and we were dealing with emergencies and set up incident command centers, and then we're dealing with how do we take all this money in, probably the most unstrategic time to go through this process was last year. We didn't have the resources, and I fully understand the strategic utility of a government strategic plan. I believe, one, county government is not a layer removed from where the action is for rural communities, which are many of the communities that we represent and make plans for. I believe, and perhaps I'm wrong, I expect everyone to disagree, I believe that data doesn't speak for itself, and if you don't have something that's statistically valid, you don't have the ability to say that the input was of high quality because you have no frame of reference for that. For example, the fact that there were so few community responses when you look at a community of 375,000 and a large number of employee responses, it could be that the responses you got from the community were from people who are working with our staff on some of these areas right now. We don't know what that data tells us. I believe that the items identified as priority, any one of the members of the Board of Commissioners would have identified as high priority because we live here and we've been dealing with this and we know what's going on. So for me, and I'm just going to give you one example of my concern when we look at where we're going and how we get there, which is what a strategic plan is supposed to be. In the 20, whatever it was, and the one before this, here was what we said we wanted to do for objective 2 or key activity 2, number 4. Develop and implement a policy for community benefits, starting with capital projects to ensure projects maximize local impact, especially with regard to promoting and prioritizing procurement by weighting the use of local business, local contractors, subcontractors, and workers that pay their employees living wages and provide them full family health benefits, that prioritize minimal carbon emissions in new construction and retrofits with net neutral buildings as the ultimate goal, design and construction that dedicates at least 1.5% of construction costs to renewable energy, require the utilization of state or federally approved training and apprenticeship opportunities for workers on construction projects. To the extent permitted by state and federal law, we will utilize this framework to develop agreements on a project by project basis. Now, in this strategic planning report, I hear, how do we integrate community benefits with climate? How do we, well, how do we implement pilot program with capital building projects to inform countywide procurement policy that aligns with climate action plan and equity goals? I would propose on this one example that we're moving backwards rapidly as it relates to the words I see in the strategic plan. And that concerns me greatly, knowing that in fact, the county is moving forward heroically in this regard. And it's being applied by this board, in fact, to projects of 500,000 and more, not 1 million and more. So I guess what I'm saying, Chair, and I'm almost done, and thank you for allowing the indulgence. What I'm saying is I just took one of the pieces, and what I see in these words is moving backwards from the specificity and saying we're going to we're going to figure out how to inform countywide procurement, when in fact, we have done that for the last 3 years. And now we ought to be looking at how we apply these procurement criteria for other than just construction jobs. So that's my concern. And at the same time, I'm not going to, like Commissioner Bozovich said on another item, I'm not going to get in the way of the will of the board at all. We have to have a plan, but I'm concerned with the integrity of this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. I'm going to weigh in very quickly before I see another hand raised, and that is to say that you're absolutely spot on in terms of the specificity that is involved in actually working a strategic plan. However, this is just a 10-page document, and it cannot be more than about a 10-page document. 10 pages is a bit long, actually, for a strategic plan. What we're beginning to talk about are the tactics involved with implementing the objectives and strategies of the plan. And you know, that's where in my mind we get deep into the details. That's the way we did it with Jerry's, for instance. It's not all in the strategic plan. And the tactics that you're talking about, Joe, you know, you get better at it every single time we come out of the gate. We're better at it every single time. And that's a part of the strategic beauty of the tactical beauty of a strategic plan, is that you get better and you look back, you let the past inform the present to guide the future, you know, and that's exactly what a strategic plan allows us to do. And I believe that having a plan that lacks detailed specificity allows us the flexibility to really strike at the moving target. So with that, I'll look for further board questions, comments, and we have Vice Chair Trigger.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks so much for the presentation. I think in response to those two comments, the way I think of this is, you know, the strategic plan is very high level for the board to adopt. Those levels of detail, some of the things that Judy started to read out as examples, those are really the work plan. Those are for the staff to do the implementation. I really appreciate the specific example Commissioner Burney gave, but I don't see anything in this plan, in his words, going backwards. I think it's all inclusive, it's all encompassing. Yes, the previous plan was perhaps more specific and more ambitious at the time we were ready to adopt the plan, but I don't see what's in this one negating that forward momentum that we have. I think it's all encompassing, all inclusive. I did have some concerns about a board order adopting a plan that has so many sort of placeholders for those metrics and those measures. And if I understood, it's not unreasonable for us to expect that the majority, if not all of those, will be filled in for us to look at and reflect on at the July report back, right? Because I do think that going through this process in the extraordinarily difficult, complex, and distracting time we've been in as a community and as a government over the last 2 years is partly what accounts for there being a little less of that detail in this plan that ideally I think our consultants and our staff and our administrator would have preferred, and in different conditions brought back to us a slightly more fleshed out metric target specific plan than we have before us. So I don't see anything in here. It's a little less than I would like to have, but there's nothing in here that's hugely concerning to me or that I see locks us into doing anything particularly regressive relative to other plans. And as we often talk about, a good strategic plan is a living document. That means we look at it, we refer to it. And when I say we, I mean the organization, less so the board. Our work is in those really high level strategic lenses, mission, vision, and that's not going to change over the next 3 years likely. But the staff being able to have that nimbleness and responsiveness and based on resources coming in and staffing capacity and community needs, I see that built in here. I'm not concerned that we're tying our hands in any particular way that's moving us backwards. I do think it could be more ambitious and more forward looking, but I fully expect updates will get us there.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And while I wait for the next hand, oh, there's the next hand, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I too was a little frustrated with not getting as much response from the public as we had hoped, but we know why. Clearly, we were into very large emergency response scenarios that were never expected. However, I know that we can't stop county work and progress because those things are happening. We have continued to work through pretty meaty items and challenging subjects as we also move through a pandemic and a massive megafire response effort. So I don't want to stall the process. I hope as we go forward, we're able to get more feedback from the public as we can. And I do appreciate those that were involved, you know, even if it's not a large amount of people or as many as we had hoped, individual voices are meaningful and what they have to say is important to us. So I want to make sure that those that did participate know that they're being heard, and we appreciate their input very much. And as we continue to refine this over the years, I hope we can incorporate some of the concerns of the board. You know, of course, I would have liked to have a whole section on housing on our affordable housing action plan. But we know that's part of the process, as we heard earlier. And this is a more overarching strategic way of presenting it to the public so they know what we're working on, and we can't be that detailed. We each have things that are really important to us on the board that we probably would have liked to have a thorough write-up on in the strategic plan, but that's not how they're crafted. I would be supportive of moving forward with what we have, knowing that we can continue to refine it and make sure that concerns like what Commissioner Burney has to say. You know, I'm thoroughly in support of our community benefits bidding process, and I want to make sure that that's incorporated, which I think it is, but it's not as specific in the overarching strategic plan. But it's important for us to continue to support as we seek the results of the strategic plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I will go ahead and weigh in very briefly. The order that we have before us does not go into any great specifics, not even as great a specific as the plan itself. So for instance, the order talks about vision, mission, purpose, values, core behaviors, strategic lenses, and priorities, but it doesn't talk about performance measures, for instance. And performance measures, I believe, are going to be both flexible and they have yet to be generated in many cases. And it doesn't talk about tactics. You know, what are we going to do every single day to make sure that we address climate change? What are we going to do every single day to make sure that people have a healthy living environment in Lane County? So the order itself doesn't lock us into strategies, because those have to be flexible. Doesn't lock us into performance measures other than developing performance measures, because those do have to once again be flexible. So I think the order that's presented to us is one that if we take a look at it, it sounds as though we have good support for it. And I see no more hands in the queue, so I am ready for a motion if someone is prepared. Commissioner Buck.
I'll move approval of Order 22-04-26-08 as presented.
I'll second.
Moved by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Vice Chair Trieger. Discussion to the motion. And first, I'm going to look, Ms. Kennedy, at you, and Ms. Williams at you, to see if there's anything you'd like to add before the board may want to discuss the motion a little bit.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to ask you, Chair Farr, if it was appropriate to address some concerns around community engagement. I'd just like to reemphasize that I've been doing this work with local governments for 25 years, and there has been a dramatic change in the way that community input is coming and the level of it during the pandemic. So to give you a little bit of contrast and to not punish yourselves for there not being more community engagement, Lake County, Illinois was my client for 10 years. I went on a long journey with them, including taking them from a point where they didn't have a strategic plan and no performance measures to a place where they had a fully board engaged strategic plan and very specific performance measures. We were doing community engagement sessions in person where there were 200 plus members of the community for a county government. And so Commissioner Burney, I just want to say there is a distinction between people's level of interaction from a community engagement standpoint from county to city. There is, but there were 200 plus members of the community participating in these in-person sessions. And that was in 2017. We had them on robocalls for teletown halls, 500-600 community members participating in these things. Since the pandemic happened, we have not, across any type of platform in any strategic planning engagement that we have done, been able to achieve that level of community engagement. So we are in a place of transition. We are in a process of trying to understand how we need to do that differently. right now. So you are not different than any other community that we have engaged over the last couple of years, and it's going to change. And I do think that your continued commitment to going after that is absolutely appropriate. And we need to just recognize where we are. It's changing, and we're going to be at a different place a year from now than we were 4 years ago and prior to the pandemic.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. And I'll state that, you know, you get down to the city level, it's a greater involvement than the county. You get down to the school board, it's greater involvement yet. And you get down to the homeowners association, oh my goodness, every single person weighs in. So, you know, it's the closer you are to your own front doorstep, the more people are willing to step out and talk about it. Any further discussion to the motion? Ms. Williams?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Commissioner, if you want to.
Commissioner Bozievich?
Thank you. I was just going to do a very short explanation of why I'm going to be voting against this motion. I have found over the years that as we continually expand the mission of county government beyond matters of county concern, we do worse at delivering core services. And this strategic plan continues that progress down, acting outside of matters of county concern. In addition, it tries to redefine infrastructure, which has been an attempt to redefine that word over the last several years, to include things that aren't. And in my mind, it actually includes strategic initiatives that I think are actually harmful to this county. The 4 top priorities that came out of citizens and our staff are matched by every survey I've looked at that are statistically valid surveys of our citizens that were done for polling for political purposes. And they're there. And I think we're pulling stuff up into our strategic plan that none of them mentioned. And I'm just going to say, without going into a lot of detail, I think we're expanding the mission of the county beyond what it needs to be, against the reality that we are going to be in a resource limited environment for this county in the next couple of years. I know I'm not going to be a county commissioner during that time, but beware of expanding the county's programs and mission at a time where we are probably going to be looking at what we have to cut 2 or 3 years down the road, because we cannot continue to pump and print money, because we're seeing 8.5% inflation now. It's going to get worse. It's going to eat into our budget. The federal government's not going to be able to rescue us because they can't turn the money machine back on, because they'll just exacerbate the inflation rates. So this strategic plan is not matched to that reality. And therefore, I'll be voting against it.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozievich. Commissioner Burney.
Thank you, Chair. Even though Commissioner Bozievich won't be a commissioner or a resident of Lane County in a couple of years, he speaks the truth. Did you know that right now there is 40% more dollars printed and circulating through our economy than there was 10 years ago? And think of what the impact of that is going to be. I'm not going to vote no. I articulated my concerns. I'm going to support this. I stated I wouldn't get in the way of the will of the board. And what Commissioners Farr and Buck and Trieger have stated, I agree with. You know, we're going to move forward. And in the same way that this will be flexible, I anticipate we're going to have to be very flexible when resources are tighter, when we do have to get back to some of our core activities. So I just want to, forgive me, I want to agree with the points that Commissioner Bozievich made. And I want to say at the same time, I don't see that as precluding moving forward and approving this plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Then one last word from Mr. Mokrahysky or Ms. Williams, or both, before we vote.
Thank you. I was just going to say a final thank you. Thanks for the conversation today. I appreciate hearing from all of you. And I think I take your words to heart, and I think we will continue to do what we can to advance this as much as we can, and you'll see that reflected in future quarterly updates and annual updates as well. But I thank you for your time and your words, and I'm excited to work with the organization to continue the work to now move forward as they're ready to work towards that destination with that purpose and clarity defined. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. And one last thing that I will say is that a strategic plan that is concise, well-designed, and easy to understand helps us to marshal and use the limited resources that we have. And as resources become more limited, the more critical it is that we have a strategic plan to work from. So we have before us Order 220426-08, moved by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Vice Chair Trieger. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Passes 4-1 with Commissioner Bozovich in opposition. Ms. Kennedy and Dr. Warnie Griggs, excuse me, thank you so much for your work. Everyone who put work into this, thank you so much. And we'll, the proof is in the tactics. Thank you very much. So we'll move along down the agenda. And next on our agenda today, we have, excuse me, Order 22-04-26-07 in the matter of the removal of 4 gates, which I know, along Richardson Upriver Road 4386-00, etc. And today we have our road planner, Matt Tarnoff, with us. Mr. Mograisi, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the panel.
Go ahead, Matt. You can lead the discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
All right. Well, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners. Steve. Let's see. Let's share my screen here and pull up a map. Some of us know where this place is, but about halfway between Veneta and Mapleton, you can see there's 4 purple dots here in the middle of my map. This is Highway 126, the yellow line, and Auster Road bisects Richardson Upriver, where the 4 gates are located. A little bit of history here. In 1999, there was a fire dubbed the Auster Fire that created some unstable slopes and some hazardous road conditions. And there was a pair of board orders that went out that fall, basically resulting in a road closure plan with the intent to keep the gates open and then close them in case of emergency, requiring facility permits to access the areas for both residents and renters. And since 1999, things have gone pretty quiet until about 2021, about a year ago. Discussions came up regarding the operation, the functionality, and the need of the gates. So what are the policy issues that we're looking at? The last board order in the fall of 1999 established access restrictions to Richardson Upriver due to then existing hazardous conditions, and those conditions are no longer present. So the purpose of the board order has become obsolete and therefore should be overridden with a new board order. Likewise, the gates designed to force the traveling public to physically comply with the access restrictions have not been used in many years and are themselves obsolete via regulatory standard. Lane Code 15.215 states the county has authority to apply corrective action to prohibited activities and restrictions on public and county roads. And these activities include any that has the potential of hindering normal operation, maintenance, safety, or general use. Furthermore, another subsection in that same chapter defines gates as fixed objects which are considered prohibited activities and subject to the failure to comply and enforcement provisions of Lane Code. Pardon me? Oh.
My phone just started talking for no reason. I'm sorry.
Right. I activated your Siri, huh? Anyway, so the board goals, the board stands to fortify robust infrastructure strategic priority by supporting public works crews to function efficiently and economically while simultaneously maintaining safety and maintenance priorities on county facilities. There are some financial considerations, albeit very negligible influence on the road maintenance budget. It does cost money to maintain gates and signage within the county system. County resources already exist to respond to emergent conditions and or road closures, which in turn renders the current gates obsolete. Likewise, the opportunity to minimize maintenance duties on this facility provides the county that much more time and resources to respond to maintenance needs elsewhere. There are no anticipated health implications, so that's good. And the general analysis that we've come up with is that the apparent intent of the board order from December of 1999 was to regulate the access via facility permit to an area that was deemed unsafe at the time. The fire and subsequent unstable slopes along the facility had led to multiple events that impeded the flow of traffic. The facility damage and slope instability have since been abated, and the gates that were intended to provide access restrictions have been unused and locked open for many years. The operation of the gates has caused some confusion and concern in the sense that residents along the facility do not possess keys to the locks, which is not a normal practice for other gates in the county. The concern from the residents appears to stem from how to handle emergent events, or rather who can open, close, and or lock the gates. Likewise, dispersed liability is anticipated to cause further confusion in the event that someone was to leave a gate open during a necessary road closure. The associated signage for gates has caused minor inconveniences for residents in the form of delivery drivers being deterred by signs reading "gate ahead, no turnaround." ODF, Oregon Department of Forestry representatives, would actually prefer that the gates remain to close off the road in the event of forest closures due to extreme fire risk or hazardous conditions. However, ODF simultaneously recognizes there are logistical challenges in managing gates on remote roads such as this. County staff has identified other ways to close the road if necessary due to fire risks or hazard, as is done in other locations within the county. By removing the gates, the associated signage, the residents, jurisdictional partners in the county stand to gain from less maintenance resources and confusion, all while still relying on current county standard operating procedures for responding to emergent events and temporary road closures. So it stands before us three alternatives. We could take no action at this juncture, which would still require financial and physical resources to update the signage and continue on with OMUTCD. Wandering mouse there, sorry about that. The second option, we remove the gates. Remove the signage, but keep the gates. The county is well equipped to handle any road closures with temporary signage. But the recommendation that the county staff has, public works staff that is, as the third option is to remove all four gates and related signage. Effectively,
Pardon me, Mr. Turnoff. Chair Trigo, will you handle the gavel for a few moments? I need to step away to handle an issue that just came up.
Yes, I can do that.
Pardon me.
Sorry about that. By removing the gates and the signage, the county stands to bring this facility into normal maintenance rhythms. In the event of an emergency road closure, the facility would be treated like any other closure utilizing county resources as needed. The timing and implementation, upon approval from the board, the Lane County road maintenance crews will make plans to remove all four gates and related signage in question. Simultaneously, residents, jurisdictional partners will be contacted to inform them of the pending action. We do not anticipate any follow-up needed after this if the board was to approve this matter going forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions for staff or clarifications needed before I entertain a motion, and then we can have discussions of the motion should it be seconded? Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you. As this is in my district, I've been asking a local resident of Richardson Upriver Road about their opinions on the gates. And they're kind of like, well, they've been locked open forever. And you know, their first thought was, why don't residents get keys? And we just heard why that's an issue liability wise and just logistically keeping track, et cetera. You know, so I'm kind of wondering, you know, the gates can have a function, you know, that ODF, you know, wants them to stay in, but I do understand how the signage causes issues for deliveries and general traffic. Is it really that bad to leave the gates in, but take the signage down and put up temporary signage if they need to be utilized?
Yeah, I guess bad is a relative term. There's nothing regulatory that I'm aware of that would impede that operation. And like I said, we're well equipped to put temporary signage if that is the direction the board seems to go.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I'm back. So, and I did hear the comments by Commissioner Trieger. Commissioner Bozievich, excuse me. Any further discussion to this item? Then we have before us order 22042607. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Bozievich. You have a hand raised. We don't have a second yet. So Mr. Commissioner Bozievich.
So Chair and Vice Chair Trieger is making the motion. I would, you know, knowing how difficult it is to get gates back in sometimes, you know, gating of roadways is pretty controversial to some degree. I am leaning towards the option of asking Public Works to remove the signage and leave the gates locked open. Just understanding ODS concerns. You know, I work with Link Smith a lot. Firefighting and forest access is a big issue out here, particularly during high hazard seasons. And the last couple of years haven't taught us to be wary of wildfire and being prepared and having gates installed and ready to close rather than having to, you know, lowboy a bulldozer out to plow up a berm on a temporary basis. I think is a much faster response, and you know, with some temporary signage, close gate ahead, you know, is a lot quicker response. It may not be exactly what Public Works is asking for, but my gut reaction is don't pull out a piece of infrastructure that we've already got installed, and just pull the signage that's causing the issues with deliveries and other stuff. So, you know, I would be more than happy to second a motion that way, or make that motion, see if somebody will second it. And I don't know if there's a suggested wording that's an option for the board, or do we need to direct staff to come back with that sort of board order?
Thank you, Commissioner Bozievich. We'll continue the discussion with Commissioner Burney.
Mr. Tarnoff, is there a negative to what Commissioner Bozievich is suggesting? Because it wasn't what you recommended.
Yeah, I guess what we're trying to do is be as efficient as possible with all of our maintenance resources, as tight as they're getting, and having more maintenance on that road. Obviously, the signs would be gone, but we'd still have to go and inspect the gates and the signage that is required to be on the gates themselves. And again, that was the signage that is now outdated. So all signs in the county get looked at about 2 times a year. So again, like I said before, it is negligible. So if it has to be negative, that's the negative.
Okay.
Thank you. And coincidentally, I drive that road about 2 times a year. And each time I pass those gates, I think, well, I hope it's not locked when I come back. Clearly, I should breathe easily on that one, since it never is locked. So, yeah. So then we do have a motion without a second at this point, so it's still an open debate. And Vice Chair Trieger, you do not have a second yet. A little bit out of order on my part, calling for the motion. So, any thoughts on what we should do? Commissioner Buck, offer some wisdom, please.
Well, you know, I am okay either way, really. There is language as alternative options in our material today. I too am having discussions in East Lane about installing gates in certain roads, and it is challenging. And when you've got them there, and you need them quickly in a wildfire situation, that can be quite helpful, because if they're not there and you need them instantly, it's not going to happen in an emergency fashion. So I can see it both ways. I know there's some expense to keeping them there if they're not used, but I also know how valuable they are and emergency responses with ODF and other crews. So I would default to a motion made by the commissioner of that district.
Then the previous motion is languishing, for lack of a second. I'm not going to say it's failed for lack of a second, but it's languishing, most certainly. And I would entertain from Commissioner Bozich, if you do have a substitute motion, or just a direction. It may not need a motion for something that's simply removal of signs.
So I was going to move that the board approve option 2 to remove the signage and keep the gates. And I don't know if there needs to be a board order with that or not, because we're not changing the use of the road. So that's my motions to approve option 2.
Second.
Then option 2, which is remove signage, keep gates, etc., which includes a maintenance clause, at least a bi-yearly maintenance clause on that. It's moved by Commissioner Bozich and seconded by Commissioner Burney. These gates have a very specific function. There are 4 of them that create a dead area in between, because to the west of gate 2, to the west of the covered bridge, and to the east of gate 2, to the east of the covered bridge, you can get out that way anyway, and there are no residences between these gates. So it's just a really ad hoc double pair of gates. So I'm either way, as long as you don't lock it behind me when I'm someplace in between the 2 gates. So then any discussion to Commissioner Bozovich's motion, which is option 2. Commissioner Burney.
I think it would incur substantial costs on staff to monitor your behavior, Chair Farr, and to organize the closing or locking upon it. But nonetheless, I support this motion.
Track my GPS. Very good. Then we moved and seconded. No further discussion to the motion. Then I will call for the vote on Commissioner Bozovich's motion to remove the signage, keep the gates for future maintenance and consideration. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously without board order, just with a direction from the Board of County Commissioners. Mr. Tronoff, thank you very much for your research, your work on this. And if you need somebody to help you maintain those signs, I'll join you, because that is a lovely stretch of highway.
All right. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you. Then we'll move along to, let's see, we are down. We're on item 13B, and Brett, thanks for waiting. We have a report on Lane County Parks Facilities Condition Assessment, Phase 2. And today, Mr. Mokrajski, we have a panel that includes Brett Henry, who's our Parks Division Manager. Mr. Mokrajski, I'll turn it over to you to introduce your panel.
Thank you, Chair. Brett, go ahead and walk through the presentation.
I guess I'd already done.
Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Chair and fellow commissioners. For the record, my name is Brett Henry, and I'm the Parks Division Manager for Lane County. Today, Mr. Dean Leonard with Faithful and Gould and I will present the findings of a second facility condition assessment of our Lane County parks. So from the moment I was hired back in the summer of 2018, seems like a long time ago, but it really wasn't. It was known that Lane County parks have a huge backlog of deferred maintenance. So it was really a primary goal of mine to determine the extent of that deferred maintenance within the park system and to work hard to reduce that maintenance backlog as soon as I possibly could. So to give you the definition of deferred maintenance occurs when routine repairs to infrastructure are postponed, and this can result in the deterioration and sometimes failure of that infrastructure over a period of time. So over the past 40 years, Lane County Parks, unfortunately, has really lacked the operating budget to conduct preventative maintenance. As a result, critical repairs to save costs and stay within budget, maintenance has been postponed. So that created, obviously, our backlog of deferred maintenance. Recognizing that Lane County parks are critically underfunded and understaffed, the board assigned the county administrator and the Parks Division manager to form a funding task force. And that task force is made up of concerned citizens throughout the county that definitely have an interest in our Lane County parks. The task force met for over a year with the assignment of researching and recommending sustainable funding options to reduce our deferred maintenance backlog and bring our parks up to a higher standard. On October 19th of last year, the task force findings were presented to the board with a recommendation of a $6 million 5-year local option levy as the preferred funding initiative. This past February, the funding plan implementation calendar was presented to the board. And this calendar is sort of a roadmap or an outline, and it shows the different tasks that are required prior to placing a potential levy on the November ballot. In 2019, the Parks Division received funding support from the county administration to hire the firm Faithful & Gould to begin a facility condition assessment of our parks. On October 12th last year, Mr. Dean Leonard with Faithful & Gould presented the results from a facility condition assessment of the 4 parks within our system that contain the greatest amount of built infrastructure. Those parks were Armitage, Baker Bay, Orchard Point, and Richardson. The findings of that study indicated that the current deferred maintenance backlog estimate of those 4 parks was nearly $16 million. If no capital investments were made to these parks over the next 10 years, the total expenditures were expected to increase to over $27 million. Last year, the Parks Division received enough funding to conduct a second facility condition assessment, and we're calling this Phase 2. The second assessment was again conducted by Faithful & Gould, and it included an additional 13 parks. Those parks in the assessment were Archie Knolls, Bender Landing, Camp Lane, Farnham Landing, Harbor Vista, Lenslaw, Hendricks Bridge, the North Jetty, Howard Buford Recreation Area, Perkins Peninsula, Triangle Lake, Westlake, and Zumwalt. The results of the Phase 2 study show that the current deferred maintenance backlog of these 13 parks is almost $5 million. If there are no capital investments that are made within the next 10 years, those expenses are expected to grow to over $11 million. And again, this is due to a compounding deferred maintenance cost. So once funding is secured, a third and final assessment of the remaining parks is planned. After the third assessment of the remaining parks, a verified deferred maintenance backlog of the park system will be known. However, if one does a rough assessment of the remaining developed parks, which are primarily boating facilities, it appears that at least another $2 to $3 million in immediate deferred maintenance backlog is likely. This would bring the total current backlog of expenses within the park system to around $25 million. However, again, without any investments made over a 10-year period, this estimate would grow to nearly $42 million. And again, that is due to the deferred maintenance as it accumulates over time. Please note, however, it is our plan to do a verified and accurate estimate of a third facility condition assessment. As promised earlier, Mr. Leonard will now present Faithful & Gould's study by outlining the methodology and giving a summary of their findings with 3 budget scenarios. After Mr. Leonard's presentation, both he and I will remain online for any questions or discussion. So Dean, whenever you're ready, go right ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners, for, again, the opportunity to present a summary of the results of this second phase facility condition assessment. And thanks, Brett, for providing a great introduction to those results. Let me just go through the process of sharing my screen here. So in this presentation, you're seeing appropriate summarized information. But to back up this, to provide that defendable data set, there are detailed facility condition assessment reports and spreadsheets available to you to drill down into those details. What we're going to see today is just that holistic view, that roll-up of that data set. And really the purpose, again, of a study like this is to provide that knowledge and insight, that defendable information to key stakeholders to make strategic decisions. So as Brett outlined, this is a facility condition assessment. These are the parks that we assessed in the second phase, 13 parks. And these are the type of assets and equipment and systems that we reviewed at each park: parking lots, pavilions, lodges, cabins, play equipment, visitor centers, restrooms, picnic areas, etc. There were some below grade sewage camera studies as well at those parks that contain those types of systems, and the results are incorporated into each report. Just to walk through and remind everybody really the process of what we go through when we undertake a study like this is we start off with this essential planning phase where we meet with Brett and the supervisors and plan out the project. We understand what issues that they're seeing at each facility, each park, to help guide that site assessment phase. And then with that knowledge and insight, we then do a detailed assessment of the various systems and equipment associated with each park. Then we come back and analyze that data and normalize it. We drill down into it, looking at cost rates to replace. We look at remaining useful life estimations, life cycle assessments, prioritization, etc. And then pull that together into a written report that's backed up with Excel digital files as well, so that you can drill down and manage the data. Go through a quality assurance review that provides you with this knowledge that's going to feed into a strategic plan. Looking at the results, just a reminder, part of the evaluation is to provide a facility condition index of each location, of each park. And it's a benchmarking system. It's a way of benchmarking the relative condition of one park against another across your portfolio. And just the simple metrics of taking the value of all the deficiencies that we've identified and divided that by the current replacement value of that facility or that park location, gives you this index score of 0 to 5 is good, 5 to 10 is fair, 10 to 50 to 60 is poor, and beyond that is very poor. Just one factor in your strategic decisions when you're looking at funding for your parks and the overall condition. And so when we're looking at the results of that FCI score, currently we have one park that's in good condition, no parks fall into that fair category, 10 parks are in poor condition and 2 in very poor condition. Just a slight change in that FCI score over that 10-year period, assuming the worst case scenario that we don't have funding or we don't have the right level of funding, we'll still have 1 park in good condition, no in fair, poor condition, and 7 in poor, but 5 will deteriorate further into a very poor condition. And so the current value of the deficiencies that we've identified is just over $6 million, and over that 10-year period is $11.3 million, and we'll get into the details that in a moment. So the breakdown of that FCI score now against each park, you can see each this traffic light system where your highest priority needs are. You're looking at Harbour Vista here, North Jetty, that are both in currently very poor condition, very high FCI scores, unusually high. So we've got some major backlog maintenance at those two locations in particular, but quite a number of them, as you see, are currently in poor condition and will continue to deteriorate over that 10-year period. Please shout up and ask any questions, because I'm not kind of monitoring visually if anybody's put their hand up, or we can go back to any slide at any point. Then a summary of the capital needs over this 10-year study period. That's $6 million worth of immediate need over the 10-year period. That calculates at $8 million. And as Brett mentioned there, that if we don't have the right level of funding, that $8 million is going to compound into $11.3 million when you factor in escalation. And I think we factored in an assumed 4% escalation. We know that it's much higher than that this year. We're hoping to see a normalization of inflation rates in future years, but you and I don't have control over that. We can't see into the future. And so from a budgeting point of view, we've escalated these numbers year by year by a 4% construction inflation index. So it could be more, it could be less. But as needs are not addressed one year, the balance of that gets carried over to the next year. And then instead of having 4% in year one, now you've got 8% escalation of those needs that you've not, of those unfunded needs, and then you carry that up to year three, then all of a sudden you've got 12% escalation of those needs that you've carried over from year one, if you like. So that's the basis of that escalation calculation, and really emphasizes the point of this model of deferring these deficiencies. And so looking at the breakdown on a year by year, this expenditure forecast on a building by building basis, we've calculated the current replacement value. We've said 2022 is the current year. Obviously, with budget cycles, you're not going to be funding anything this year for any construction project. So all this is going to get kind of pushed down the line to align with your funding cycles. But we always have year one as the current assessment year. And so you can see that $6 million worth of need and how that breaks down against each particular park location. And then we've got a couple of years that no needs have been identified. And that might seem a little odd that we've got $6 million and then the following 2 years we don't have any budget needs. This is a direct relationship to that life cycle or end of useful life of the systems and equipment that we've inventoried and identified. And so if we've categorized something that needs to be replaced or should have been replaced previously in 2022, we put that expenditure in the first year. But other pieces of equipment, we got 2025 at $27,000 there. That's when we estimate that system or deficiency will need to be addressed, and not 23 and 24. So it's a direct relationship to when we think that system is going to come to end of useful life. Then looking at some scenario planning here. So if it was fully funded, and everybody had all the money in the world. We'd spend $6 million in the first year, and then it would drop to 738,000, and so on and so forth for the balance of that 10-year study period. We know budget funding scenarios don't work like that, but this is if everything was fully funded and you had all the money. So just looking at another scenario, then if we try to normalize and average out, what's the right level of funding that we need to get our arms around a strategic plan over the next 10 years, not over the next 1 or 2 years, but over the next 10 years? How can we break this growing deferred maintenance, this backlog maintenance that keeps growing and growing every year? Well, if we're thinking, well, $500,000 per year, what does that look like? So if we fund that against those yearly needs, we've got $5.5 million in the first year that's unfunded. So that then gets carried forward to 23 and 24. As we saw previously, there was no need for funding in those 2 years. So the unfunded portion gets carried forward and increased escalation. You can see at the end of the 10-year period, we'd still have a $5.8 million worth of backlog maintenance of need with a $500,000 per year over these 13 parks, I would add. Then looking at the optimum level of funding needed to get the ship on the right track, we're looking at $1 million per year as we start to plot that $1 million per year against those funding needs. And that's just two scenarios. You could look at any amount of different scenarios to come up with a strategic plan that best meets the needs of Lane County. You could front load it and have a target, a goal of let's look at the first 3 years and let's have a $2 or $3 million per year for the first 3 years, and then a much reduced level of funding need for the remaining 7 years. And so you can play around with the needs and the funding levels to best match your funding availability, if you like. So looking at those needs broken down per building, we're seeing this park here, Howard Buford, I think that's how you say it, rec center there is $2.3 million. Perkins Peninsula Park, $1.5 million. I think that and Harbour Vista are the lion's share of that need. And then you're seeing then across those 13 parks how that funding breaks down. Then looking at prioritization, we look at this need through a different lens. Okay, so we've got this need that we've identified, but what's the prioritization of those needs? Is it currently critical? Is it necessary? Is it potentially critical, or something that's necessary but not critical that we can afford with minimal risk to defer that to future years, and it's not going to impact the health and safety of the park employees or the public members that are utilizing those particular facilities, and it's not going to impact that particular system and see accelerated deterioration. But interestingly, as we look at year one, we have we only have $74,000 worth of currently critical, and $5.4 million worth of potentially critical. So there's more work then, more follow-on work to drill down into what's the makeup of that priority 1 need, what's the makeup of priority 2, and what do I absolutely need to do right now. when we look at the type of deficiency, deferred maintenance, routine, and capital, we're seeing the lion's share of that need in the first year being deferred maintenance. And so those are those items that Brett mentioned about deficiencies that ideally should have been funded and improved upon and taken care of in prior years. Doesn't mean to say that they're all priority one, but we see quite a number of them potentially critical. So it is a huge factor that we've got such a large amount of that need in that deferred maintenance category. And then we've identified some routine maintenance that typically the maintenance staff would like to take care of. One of the consequences of these kind of results is that the maintenance staff who we've walked around and seen the great work that they're doing, their focus should be on preventative, on extending the life of systems and equipment, and maintaining it all in good condition. But with the volume of deferred maintenance, they're putting band-aids and they're dealing with critical items that they're having to repair and fix and put band-aids on, because there isn't the right level of funding to replace that piece of equipment out or that system at its optimum level. And so that's kind of the consequences of having such a high deferred maintenance. It adds to the workload of the maintenance staff, and they get diverted into emergency mode and doing emergency repairs instead of proactive planning. And so just to summarize then, one park is currently in good condition, 10 are in poor, 2 are in very poor condition. The current FCI rating for the combined parks is 40%, so overall poor condition, and that will increase to very poor condition over the 10-year period. We've identified $8 million worth of need over the 10-year study period, which would grow from a compound inflation perspective to $11.3 million. In terms of deferred maintenance, there's just under $5 million worth of deferred maintenance identified. $1.6 million of capital renewal and about $1 million worth of routine maintenance. That's the end of the presentation in terms of the results. Is there anything that you would like to drill down into and talk further on?
Thank you, Mr. Leonard. From one former Yorkshire bloke to another, well presented, lot to talk about. Not necessarily the best of news, but so I'm looking to the queue for any questions or comments. Commissioner Bozovich, I don't see your hand, but I see you flaunching. Do you have? Can I start with you?
Sure, Chair. As first, I kind of laugh about Yorkshire because my wife's going to be traveling through Yorkshire at the end of the week.
Cool.
In Paris right now.
Nice.
Barbara John knows.
All right.
She's leading a tour, so she's working hard. One, I just as a generalized comment, as I looked at the replacement value for something like a couple of these parks, Archie Knowles in particular, I just can't imagine being able to rebuild Archie Knowles for $600 and some thousand for 9 camping spots, sanitary sewer system and water system and bathroom facilities and all that stuff, and camp host location. So but that's not either here nor there that I think you may be undervaluing the replacement values. Yep. It doesn't change the backlog of deferred maintenance or capital replacement needs.
Yeah.
And that's the news that comes out of this. And I don't know if you can answer this easily or Brett can. You're presenting just now the phase 2 portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything that compare what the total deferred cost is for both phase 2 and phase 1, minus the ARP money that we allocated towards these projects, just to give me a ballpark of where we are? I know we've still got phase 3 to go yet,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm just trying to get a magnitude of the problem.
Sure, I'll
I
answer
think
that.
Brett touched on that in his opening remarks, didn't he?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so with the first report we got, the overall deferred maintenance backlog was about $16 million. And then the second report, and that was four parks. The second report was an additional 13 parks. So now we're looking at the 17 parks with the most, what we determined was the most built infrastructure. And we also wanted some parks that had some representative facilities, like the boating facilities, that we could compare when we're looking at the remainder of the parks. So again, we're looking at about 16 million for the first study, and the second study, I believe, was around 5 million. So that gives us a total of 21 million in deferred maintenance with the 2 studies. And so with the remainder of the parks, I took a look at each one and looked at the infrastructure within each park that actually has infrastructure. As you guys know, a lot of our parks do not have any built infrastructure. They're just natural areas. And just kind of a back of the envelope calculation was about another $2 to $3 million in deferred maintenance. And this is our current deferred maintenance once again. So that would be about $25 million would be our backlog in deferred maintenance right now. Now, I keep bringing up the example, if we let this continue to accumulate over the next 10 years, then that maintenance is expected to grow to about $42 million.
Great, that gives me that ballpark of where that is and the need. So thanks for establishing that for me.
Sure.
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the depressing presentation. I get the compounding cost if we continue to allow things to go untended, but is that because of the anticipated increase in labor and materials cost? Is it because of the continued deterioration makes the problem worse? Is it some combination thereof? How do you calculate that compounding total?
I'll let Dean answer that one.
Yeah, so the needs per year have been identified based upon where we think that piece of equipment or that system is likely to fail. Based upon a number of different considerations, we determine, okay, in 8 years' time, you're going to need to replace this parking lot surface. So that's where the baseline number comes from. And that's priced at net present value, so today's dollars. So in order to try and determine where we're at in 8 years' time, we've got a compounding 4% inflation calculated there per year. And why it's compounding is it might be 4% next year, this time next year, but the year after you've got another 4%, so that's now 8%, and then it jumps to 12%. And it's normal to put what you might, to best guess as an average construction inflation cost per year based upon, the last historic 5 years or 10 years of inflation numbers. It used to be 2.5% to 3% maximum inflation costs. We've increased it to 4% because we know over the last couple of years at least we've seen construction prices rise significantly. But we don't know what that looks like. So that average may be 5-6% over the next 10 years. We just don't know that. And so we've used an average of 4% per year to try and get you closer to that budget number.
Okay, so there's a formula applying across the board, and then as you said, some things, obviously there's because of the nature of what it is, an underground sewer pipe versus surface parking lot, you do some calculations on that. Okay. And where can we find more of the detail? For example, the HBRA, the Howard Buford Recreation Area, was one of the highest dollar value items, right? The 2-point-some million. But I don't know, what is that, a building? Is that bathrooms and sewage? Is that parking lot? Where can we find that kind of detail for the parks that you've identified?
So Commissioner Dreiger, it's the report, and I can send you guys all the reports. I didn't want to burden you with 13 reports in your packet, so I just sent you the executive summary.
I appreciate that.
They're all available, and I will send all of them to you guys so you can look and see, dig into the details. As far as HBRA, or Howard Buford Recreation Area, I think the lion's share of that was from the caretaker's house. Mm-hmm. And it's in extremely poor condition. And so, some of those costs are also like the feasibility and the engineering as well. And so it's not just replacing apples for apples, so to speak. So, there's those calculations in there as well. But I will send you that report and as well as the rest of the other 12.
Great, thank you.
I've got the spreadsheet pulled up, and the top 5-6 are North Jetty. There's a full depth asphalt replacement of your parking lot. At Perkins Peninsula, there's a cold water service and tank and pump house needs replacement. That's $457,000. We've got some more pressurized treatment wood of the boating dock at Westlake. We've got some more parking lot replacement at a couple of other locations as well. So you'll certainly be able to drill down into the details of each one of those parks and the individual deficiencies.
And I do want to point out, like, when you look at North Jetty Park, for instance, and you see the high FCI, a lot of that is because there's just not a lot of infrastructure there. And the infrastructure that currently exists is in poor shape, like the parking lot, that's the main lot where folks can access the beach. And so, we're looking at deferred maintenance over replacement value. And so that, that number can look exceedingly high when there's very little infrastructure currently at the park.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can confirm those are some killer potholes in that parking lot.
It's about the worst I've ever seen.
There's swimming pools, they're not puddles.
And the sea lions come inland and then they frolic around in those after a good rain.
But that I mean, it might seem a very low priority. Yeah, we've got some cracked parking lot, some deteriorated parking lot, but if you've seen significant potholes there and cracking and a shift in the parking lot levels, that's a huge health and safety risk and liability risk to you as an organization if somebody falls and has a severe accident there. So there are reasons why we've put some of these on the list.
Thank you, Vice Chair Trigger. Commissioner Burney.
Thank you. I'll be brief. My sense is that I have a feeling where this is going, and it's going to probably look like a request for a bond thing. And in that context, at the next iteration of this, when we meet again, I would like to have, prior to the articulated assumptions about costs, because whether it's articulated assumptions about inflation at 4%, or whether it's holding true at labor costs, which I think we're seeing huge, historically high increases in labor costs, whether it's assumptions about supply chain and where items are coming from. I think we're going to have to hone in on these numbers. Maybe you have done that already, Mr. Henry. I see two Mr. Henrys. Maybe you've done that already, but I think it's this. I think again, we know where this is going, and so I want to really understand the assumptions almost granularly, because I have, for example, you really don't know what X is going to cost till you put out and get 3 bids for providing X. And I know it can't be that granular, but nonetheless, that'll be really helpful for me when we're actually looking at the specifics of that type of request. Thank you so much, Chair.
And thank you, Commissioner Burney. Thank you for the questions and the answers in the queue. I see no further hands raised in the queue. I'm going to say this, $1 million a year gets us out of the hole in 10 years, basically. In the grand scheme of things, $1 million is only one with 6 zeros after it, That being said, what is more important to this Board of Commissioners and the people of Lane County? Is it putting $1 million into parks each year, or $1 million into public safety, or into roads and other infrastructure? We have different sources of money that pay for the different things. So that's a longer discussion that we have to have, is how important is it? We're looking at the possibility of a parks bond right now, but I don't know how much of that will actually go to maintenance. And maybe now's not the time. We'll be talking about that more down the road. But clearly, for anybody who uses the parks, particularly people who use a single park on a regular basis, and I'll tell you, the parks are so important, and $1 million doesn't sound like a lot to them when they look at the entire size of Lane County's budget. But that being said, it would have to come from someplace else or be generated as a new revenue stream. And that's the discussion we're going to have, Mr. Leonard and Mr. Henry. We have the numbers before us right now. Is there anything else that you'd like to hear from us other than we want to do it? Just give us a reason to spend the money on that. Last week I was talking about how do we go forward with a parks fund for the future? How do we get people to agree to it when they just don't agree with very many tax measures, particularly when put forward by the county? Cities, school districts have different levels of success. So it's a matter of creating the urgency in people's minds and creating the picture in people's minds of what it is that they're getting for their money. When Commissioner Trieger talks about the swimming pools in North Jetty, anybody who's seen them knows exactly what she's talking about, and they know exactly where the money would be spent. That's a part of the urgency that we have, is to create that in people's minds, because I do believe that a lot of people go to a county park and don't even know that they're in a county park, to tell you the truth. They know they're in a nice open space, a place they love to be, but I don't know, what is this? This is a boat ramp, right? Well, it's a county park. So anything else for the order of this discussion from the board?
Thanks, Chair. Just one more point. It will be a local option levy that we're looking at, not a bond. Also, and I think you made a really good point, we need to talk about the condition of our parks, but also allow people to see what they would get for their money. And so last March, we put out a public poll to understand how people felt about Lane County parks, and would they be willing to fund the parks based on different dollar thresholds, all the way up to, I believe, $50 a year. And even up to $50 a year, looking at it right now, the support was 61%. So we felt pretty good about a levy and about the amount, the $6 million 5-year amount. But we're going to do another poll here in May, and it's going to be more targeted around a levy and around what would potentially go in the levy and how people felt about funding our parks. And so that'll give us more information that we'll share with you here in June and July.
Much more to talk about. And Vice Chair Trieger, before I call on you, I'm going to mention this. I was on the Eugene City Council for 10 years. I've said that twice already today. I'll say it again. During those 10 years, starting about 1997, every time we said something every time we put something on the ballot that said parks, it was yes with a huge positive response. So it's a matter of creating that kind of urgency in the people who live outside of the city limits for their parks, the kind of urgency that the city of Eugene's done a good job of creating with the people who pass their bond bonds and let's see, it's a park bond time after time. So with that, I'll go to you, Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, I was just going to mention, if memory serves, I was looking through the materials, but we don't have the slides from the previous agenda item around our strategic plan, but our parks were mentioned in the top 5 of the things that community and our own organization mentioned as a priority of a resource and an asset to protect and enhance.
That is a reason for encouragement, for enthusiasm. Thank you very much for pointing that out, Commissioner. Anything further? Then I think we'll talk about Huddersfield, Barnsley, Rotherham, Sheffield United, and Leeds down the road.
Absolutely, Leeds United.
Well, the Blades are going to be playing Leeds again next year in the Premiership. Mark my words. All right.
Stay up. I appreciate your time this afternoon.
All right, and we will see and hear more from you. Thank you very much. Mr. Henry, thank you very much. Mr. Mokrajski, anything else on this agenda item?
I don't think so. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. This is a good discussion, and we'll be continuing again. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Then we'll move along to first to Commissioner's business, and I'm going to mention that, let's see, Mr. Mokrajski, did you complete your administration announcements?
I did. Thank you.
Very good. And then we'll move down to Commissioner's business. Item 14A, any announcements from the Board of Commissioners? Nothing. Then we'll move along to future board assignment requests. And I think that Commissioner Bozievich telegraphed one earlier in the day. Vice Chair Trieger, hands first. There you go.
Thank you, Chair. This is an agenda request. If I'm doing this right, we've all received a few emails. Most recently, a reminder today from a gentleman named Greg Miles, asking for a letter authorizing the chair to sign, or excuse me, authorizing a letter granting authority for secure medical transport. This is something that they've been providing over years. He quotes the Oregon statute, revised statute, under which they do this. And there's been some back and forth. I think at least one other commissioner is connected with our Health and Human Services director, who's checked in with our Behavioral Health Division director, and there's no issue on the staff side that we can tell. And so I'm just asking for head nods to see if we can get that letter authorizing continuation of the service of secure medical transport using the language Mr. Miles provided in his letter that's modeled after past years when we've done such a letter. So asking if there are head nods, if people have had a chance to see that email, that we authorize the chair to sign on behalf of the board and get that taken care of.
I'm good with that.
Great, thank you.
Looks like you got your head nods, and then Mr. Mokrajski, that'll come forward to you as an assignment. Further assignments, future board assignments.
I believe, sorry, I want to make sure I'm doing this right. I believe it was that we can just get the letter taken care of. It doesn't need to come back. Is that right? It's not a board order. It's simply a matter of business that we're asking to be taken care of. Is that right?
That's the way you worded it, Commissioner Trieger. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Still finding my way around some of the protocols. Thank you.
Good, doing well. Further assignments or requests, future agenda item requests. Okay, then let's see, we were, well, that brings us to item 15, if we're gonna stop right there. Mr. Clark, I think you're with us to talk about an item that looks like we're not gonna be talking about. Oh, there we go, Commissioner Bozievich.
Excuse me, Chair. I wasn't sure if it comes under future board assignment requests because I'm asking the board to provide direction to staff on the interpretation of land use law and how the county should interpret that. So I thought that was other business. So that's kind of why I wasn't. It's a weird thing because we kind of get to other business after review of assignments.
We do, right? Because other business sometimes includes an assignment. Exactly.
Yeah.
So go ahead and let's talk about it here, even though it probably does more appropriately fit under other business. But Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. So, I've been made aware of this situation. The ORS that our county code is based on, and the words almost reflect exactly, and that word is what is currently being hung on to by land management staff versus the preceding portions about a lawfully established dwelling. And I think, the portion about having the has walls, has plumbing, heat, etc., was about what it takes to be a lawfully established dwelling. Because if you take that interpretation that has is the operative word, as soon as you removed a toilet from a 1-bedroom F2 home, you would have to go back to land use to put the toilet back in. That's if you take that interpretation. If a tree fell on the roof and it was no longer functional, you would have to go back to land use to repair that roof. That's what this interpretation is getting to. And it was not the intent of the law. It's been, rebuild permits have been issued in F2 zones since Senate Bill 100 passed and everybody adopted their comprehensive plans accordingly. So since the early 80s, we've been issuing, F2 rebuilds after disasters where there wasn't a, existing dwelling at the time, but there was a lawfully established dwelling prior to the disaster. So, the F2 zoning out there is such a small percentage of the land in this county, that it seems that that directing staff to take a more positive interpretation of this and consider the has about what it took to be a lawfully established dwelling or existing dwelling prior to the adoption of Senate Bill 100 is the correct interpretation, and allow whoever it is that might decide to appeal it, and then we'll find out through the appeals process if that language is being interpreted wrong. But to make the assumption that for 30 years, every agency in this state's been interpreting that language wrong, to me is just wrong. So I would move that the board direct land management to interpret that portion of ORS, and I don't have the ORS citation immediately in front of me. Unfortunately, I think it's something like 411-275, but interpret it to establish the requirements for legally existing dwelling and not impact the ability to reconstruct a dwelling that was damaged by fire or natural disaster.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozovich. Was that then an actual motion?
That was an actual motion.
Then as we await a second, I see a hand raised. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. So as rural commissioners, we probably deal with this a lot more than the rest of the board. And it is a very serious issue. I mean, basically, if somebody lives on F2 land and has a home and has the unfortunate accident of a wildfire and a house burns down, there's this code that says that it will basically be extremely challenging, if not impossible, to rebuild their home, which seems inherently unfair. After discussing this pretty extensively with staff, they've made it clear that there's case law surrounding this and that it's not an interpretation issue. If it was, they would interpret it exactly as Commissioner Bozovich had mentioned. And so I hope we have Andy Clark with us today to clarify. If it was interpretation, I'd be all for this. But if it's not, and we direct people to, or we state to people publicly that they can do this when they cannot, and they then have to incur the burden of costs for litigation over it, I think that holds a county in a position of liability that probably would not be great. So I'd like to hear the clarification from council to see which direction is actually the correct direction to fix this particular issue.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck, and Mr. Dingle has forwarded the information that Andy Clark is with us to talk a little bit more about this. So, Mr. Clark, do you have a clear enough direction there to provide answers?
Commissioner, Chair Farr and Commissioners, there are a lot of issues associated with this. I'm not exactly sure how to answer Commissioner Buck's question. I will state that the issue surrounds, if you don't know, whether or not someone's home that has been destroyed in some fashion can be replaced. That is a matter of state law. We have county code but the county code really repeats what's in the state statute. So it's a question of how is the state statute interpreted. The state statute for forest land replacement, dwellings in forest land, those can be replaced as long as the dwelling, and I'm quoting here, quote unquote, has certain habitability features, indoor plumbing, electricity, walls, blah, blah, blah. Conversely, in agricultural land, the statute allows a replacement dwelling for a dwelling that has been destroyed that has, quote, or formerly had those same habitability features. In this case, the issue surrounds replacement of dwellings in forest land. So the question is, if it's been destroyed, how can that dwelling still have those habitability features? By definition, it's destroyed, they don't anymore. The fact that there is that weird interpretational issue is more than frustrating to the LMD staff and to myself. Because it seems very reasonable that if you had a legal dwelling and it was destroyed through no fault of your own, you ought to be able to replace it the same way. Again, that issue has been confused by the state statutes that we're left to try to implement. I want to make clear that LMD staff hasn't denied any applications on these grounds or told anybody that if it will be one is filed, it will be. Folks have asked whether they have the authority to do that. Staff has tried to put folks on notice, hey, this is an issue. If you have a dwelling and it gets destroyed, because that's the question posed, there are these issues with replacement of it. But no decision has been made because no application has been filed on the issue. I'll go on to say that I don't think it's a good idea for the board in this meeting, in this context, to issue a direction to LMD staff as to how to interpret certain terms in the code. In part because the board would be making today a land use decision if you did that, and you'd be making a land use decision with none of the procedural rights that are due folks in land use cases. There's been no notice, opportunity for a hearing, that sort of thing. So you're essentially guaranteeing that there's an appealable issue when and if an application is ever filed, and that county direction is built into the final decision. Instead, and I've kicked this around a little bit with Ms. Bell and Mr. Miller, who are also on the call here, we would recommend that instead the board hold off on doing anything on this issue today. If and when an application for a replacement dwelling in a forest land is filed, we have looked at the standards that allow the director at LMD to elevate the decision immediately to the hearings official, rather than the director issuing a decision and allowing that decision to be appealed to the hearings official. And so we would speed through the process a little quicker. And additionally, after the hearings official gives a decision, the director could then request that the board entertain an on-the-record hearing to review the hearings official's decision. That would give the board at least the opportunity to weigh in on how the standards of replacement dwellings are applied in that particular case. It's frustrating, of course, because what we're doing is essentially potentially forcing applicants to go through this hearing procedure, but I don't think there's any way to avoid it. I think if this board gives direction as to how to interpret and apply code, as I say, I think you're building in an appealable issue, and we sort of end up back in the same spot. It's a matter that is troubling enough that we've talked about it with Alex Kyler. I think the legislative committee it's on their agenda to bring it to the board, to take it to the legislature and recommend legislative changes. I think that's where it needs to go. That, of course, is not a quick fix. We recognize that, but I think that's the only long-term one that makes sense. I'm not sure how other counties apply this law. The only person I've communicated with on it, I put out a request to the county attorneys in the state. I heard back from one of the counties. They allow replacement within a year. I asked them where that timeline comes from. They essentially borrow it from the non-conforming use standards, which doesn't make any sense to me, because the non-conforming use standards don't apply here because it's a conforming use, not non-conforming use. So it's a complicated area. There have been made statements that the agency, DLCD, agrees that these things ought to be replaced, as Commissioner Bozovic suggests. The problem with that, as I see, is that there is an agency rule that deals with replacement. Agency agrees that these replacements ought to happen when its own rule contains the same problematic language the statute does. And so I don't want to suggest that I disagree that these dwellings ought to be replaced. I'm just saying that it's not as easy as, LMD clearly has this wrong, or at least our initial impressions are it's clearly wrong, because it's certainly open for debate. But anyway, I hope that answers some of the questions.
Not for me, Mr. Clark. To me, it's just outrageous that after all of these years, this hasn't been tested to the point where it's far clearer than this in the 36 counties in Oregon, whether or not you can replace a house that's burned down. Has a house not burned down in these 45 years that's not come into question? Has nobody tried to replace a burned down house in all of these years? I think it's just outrageous to me to think that that's the case. Commissioner Bozovic, hand is raised.
Yeah, let me just ask a simple yes/no question to Mr. Clark. Has there been case law particular to the replacement of a dwelling in an F2 zone that's burned down or been destroyed by natural disaster? Because not once during that 10-minute diatribe did you mention any case law. Has there been case law?
I don't know for sure. I can't answer the question. I haven't
so this earlier that this was based on case law is inaccurate. That's all I wanted to establish. Wait, there was a statement by another commissioner, that this decision was based on case law. You just said you're not even aware of any case law, so that's not true. So let's start with that. Second, staff changed the interpretation recently. That was a land use decision being made by staff with no notice. Think about that. So there's that. Now, understanding the issue of non-conforming use, we're talking about existing conforming uses being replaced. There is clear ability to replace a non-conforming use in our code. We allow for that. To think that we're treating a conforming use with less right isn't constitutional under the state and federal constitution. We're at risk for this decision. Mr. Reese currently has a burned down house he'd like to replace, but he's not going to go through the cost of preparing plans with an architect, which I can tell you is not cheap, while land management is telling him that they're going to deny the application because he doesn't have standing walls right now. So this is a big issue. And I think our land management staff has made a land use decision without proper notice. And my motion's just to tell staff to go back. And if you are going to make that decision, let's go through the process. It's not making a land use decision as the board right now.
If I could respond real quick, I don't want to disagree too much with you. I don't have any information that land management has made any decisions, informal or not, or told anybody that their application will be denied. Requests have been, folks have asked if this were to happen, could I rebuild? And they have been put on notice that there's a issue with it, but there has been no denials.
Well, Mr. Reese was basically told if he submitted his permit, he would be denied. He testified publicly today about that, and so did one of his contractors, Mr. Rose, who also happens to be a planning commission member. So I would respectfully disagree that there has not been a decision made at the staff level to change the interpretation of this particular piece of ORS.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Buck, you have your hand raised. And I noticed that Keir Miller also has a hand raised. Would you like to hear from him before you make your comment, or comment prior to Mr. Miller?
If you don't mind, I'd just like to make a comment because he may address this when he speaks. I want to clarify a point, which is I have been given information from planning that there has been corresponding case law. And that's what I was stating earlier. In addition, I would just like to have a point of order so that the chair can help with this. I feel like it's very inappropriate for commissioners to yell at our staff in any way, shape, or form, whether in person or in a public meeting like this. I hope that you can keep order because it's not okay to yell at our staff. They're trying to do their very best to give us information that we need. We may disagree, and that's okay, but we do need to do it in a professional manner.
Thank you for that request, Commissioner. And my perception was that Commissioner Bozovich was more yelling at the air rather than at staff in particular, but I'll weigh that. Mr. Miller. You may be muted, Keir.
Thank you, Chair Farr. My apologies. Yeah, a couple of general comments. I'd like to reiterate that as staff, we find this definition, this language in state statute very frustrating. And I'll say, put it on the record, we have not denied any decisions based on this language. We have not advised anybody that they would be denied over the counter. That just, we can't tell people that over the counter. That's a land use decision. We have to accept an application, review it against the criteria. As you are all aware, we're in a very interesting county in terms of land use in Oregon because of the amount of appeals and the scrutiny we receive. So we're obligated to let folks know when we are aware of issues that may be appealable. And that's the extent, that's what we tell folks, like if you want to come in and you want to rebuild a house, there are these issues that you may encounter. That's sort of a duty of staff that we want them to be making folks aware of the challenges of the regulatory landscape. If we didn't do that, I feel like we wouldn't really be doing our job. It's our staff. They track the case law. They're aware of what's going on. They see the types of issues that these, watchdog groups are picking up on, and we try to make the public aware of that so they can prepare themselves for it. We haven't issued a denial. We haven't changed an interpretation. We've issued approvals of these replacement dwellings in the past. New case law that has come out that has spoken to this issue on the fringes, not directly addressed it, has made it very clear that there is an issue here with the language. And all we've done is relay that to the public. Not trying to scare anybody away, not trying to tell them they're going to get denied, but just make them aware that this is an issue. So that's the position we're in. As Mr. Clark mentioned, there is a way that the board can weigh in on this if we elevate this issue, which we certainly do. If someone makes an application, we can try to bring this to the board as quickly as possible, depending on if the hearing's official, regardless of what the decision is, we can get this before the board for the board to weigh in on the language. The issue is that again, as Mr. Clark mentioned, this is statutory language. The board doesn't have deference in interpreting, state land use law, just local code. So that's a challenge. So that's why we really feel like the ultimate fix to this is a legislative fix. And we understand, again, that's frustrating for folks, and it doesn't do anything in the immediate sense. But it seems like there's an issue here. These other counties, these other jurisdictions, they don't have the types of land use groups here who are going to likely appeal these things. We're not afraid of the appeal. We would try to defend our decision, but it's just the reality that we need to let the public know about.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. And regarding the land use, the land watch groups, they're not always successful in doing anything other than slowing down the process. So we know that a lot of the appeals that are placed are simply perfunctory on their part in order to slow down the process and really make it harder for people to replace their homes or to build homes to begin with. So then I see that Commissioner Berney's hand, both figuratively and on the screen, is raised. So Commissioner Berney, go ahead.
Is this called figuratively? This is a fascinating discussion. Here's what I'm gleaning out of it. One, it's absolutely not fair to not allow someone to replace their home under these circumstances in this zoning, what is it, F2, as quickly as possible. I don't hear anyone objecting to that. It's insane to me as a layperson now that it's this complex. I was preparing to completely agree with Commissioner Bosevich that we need to do this damn thing. And here's, forgive me, but with my business background, I don't want to know why I can't solve this problem. I want to know how I can solve it as quickly as possible. I know that what I'm hearing, which still seems like it's not direct, what I'm hearing is that the fastest way to do this is probably legislatively. I know that Chair Farr and I are the commissioners on the Legislative Affairs Committee, that we will be having a meeting here very soon, that we will elevate this because I think all commissioners agree this just isn't fair and it's not right. We need to let people get on with their lives. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair Berney. And that meeting is this Thursday when we can have an opportunity to talk about it. However, that's a slow process. Your question was, how do we get this resolved as quickly as possible, in particular for this one issue that's before us directly? And to me, it's just incomprehensible that nobody's replaced a burned down home, an F2 dwelling in these last 50 years. It's incomprehensible. In fact, I bet you any amount of money, and I'm not a betting person, it has happened. How have people been able to replace their homes? And I'm not yelling at anybody here, just myself. How have people been able to replace their homes that have burned down if we can't do it here in Lane County right now? How have they been able to do it? And that's really what I'd like to find. This rhetorical at this point, because I don't think anybody actually has the answer, but how have people been able to replace their homes in other counties, which I guarantee you has happened, houses that have burned down and failed to meet the letter of the statute for replacement? How have they done it? And if they've done it and found a way to do it, let's do it here. So that's the direction I'd like to go with this, Mr. Clark and Mr. Miller and whoever needs to get involved in this. How do we make it happen as quickly as possible? how have other people made it happen? Let's mirror that image. So, Mr. Miller, your hand is raised again.
Thank you, Chair Farr. I know you said it was a rhetorical question, but I'll just reiterate that, of course, dwellings have burned down and been replaced. They've happened in other counties and they've happened here. We have approved those applications in the past. And like I said, we've done this before. The only thing that has changed is there has been this case law where this language in statute has been discussed. And so it's been elevated as an issue. And we're putting folks on notice that this is a potential appeal issue. So we've approved these things in the past. But now we know that there is this language, and this language has been, daylit for these different groups to see, and just want to make everyone aware that this is a potential issue. So that's the answer to that question. How it's happening in other jurisdictions is the same way it's happened here. We read the law to mean what it should mean as opposed to what it says, right? I think, everybody's looked at this like thinking, oh, that's completely illogical to read it a different way. And we've always, viewed it that way until it's been clear and it's been discussed in this, as the issue's been brought up. So that's the answer to your question. I'm not saying anybody's wrong. I'm just saying that this is, it's being viewed, it's being not scrutinized in other counties, and I'm sure it will be scrutinized here.
Good. Then this could be a precipitory event if we do allow it to move forward. And the only problem there is that there's expense involved that somebody has to pay, whether it be architectural expenses or planning fees, whatever it may be. So Commissioner Bozovich, go ahead.
Mute myself. So first here, if you wouldn't mind sending me the case citations that discuss this peripherally, because I'm unaware of those, as it seems that Mr. Clark is too. Might want to copy Mr. Clark with those, so I can read them and understand where this revised advisories to homeowners is coming from. I'll withdraw my motion for now, but I am extremely concerned about this. And I do feel that there is a distinctive change in the recommendations provided to people over the counter. Yes, you're advising there's a possible appeal that might happen, but it was coming across to this particular resident and one that's just outside of Springfield, that basically there is no point in applying, because under current code, which they'd have to go back to the current code rather than having the replacement right, they didn't have enough acreage to meet the big game habitat stuff, where Lane County didn't stand up and fight in the appeals process in the NIMKISH decision. So we're now living under that decision, excuse me, which I'm hoping we can fix later on. That's one of the reasons why I asked for the work session on the 3rd, is specifically to look at what the results of what happened under the NIMKISH, because these F2 lands are such a small portion of the total acreage of Lane County. I mean, they're tiny. And to think that anything that happens on F2 property has a big game habitat impact is a little bit on the crazy side in some ways. But that's a completely different thing. But I would like to see, in particular, if you could email me the cases, et cetera, so I can review them, because I'm talking with land use attorneys that have statewide reach, and none of them come up with the interpretation that this law should be read the way we're currently reading it. So I'll be happy to look at that. I'm not an attorney, but I read a dang lot of case law, it seems like, in this job. And I'm pretty good at pulling stuff out of that. So please, if you don't mind, send me those citations. And I may be corrected after reading those that this is an issue. But I've really, depending on purely a legislative fix, how long did it take us to get ADUs into our zoning? Which should have been a no-brainer. It's taken years. we haven't been able to get the whole issue of the Camas Country Bakery fixed ever. You know, fixing land use law through the legislature is not a sure thing. And the next time the legislature meets is next year. And then by the time the governor signs the law without an emergency clause on it, we're talking, you know, at least a year out for a fix. And as you start thinking about that non-conforming use timeline of a year, some of these folks that want to rebuild now, if they have to wait till legislation, next thing you know, they're going to be told they took too long. So I just, please supply me with the case law, and I withdraw my motion.
Well, thank you for withdrawing the motion, Commissioner Bozovich. And Mr. Miller, thank you. You used a term that really helped me understand exactly where we are with this, and that is that light has been shed on it, and that groups have become aware of this particular nuance of the law. So I think that makes this an extenuating circumstance. And from here, Commissioner Burney, you and I think we'll talk about this a little bit on Thursday, perhaps, as far as a direction for the legislature. But in the meantime, Mr. Miller and Mr. Clark, if you could put together an answer from Commissioner Bozovich regarding case law, perhaps, or regarding if there is a potential fix for this specific property that we're talking about, the one on Mercer Lake, then maybe we can move forward a little bit faster than the legislative process. I think 1 year is very optimistic on legislative action, quite frankly, Commissioner Bozovich. So anything else beyond that? Commissioner Buck, you had a number of good things to say about this. Anything you'd like to say in summary?
I'll just add that I'm very supportive of finding a variety, any fix as soon as possible. It's definitely more complicated than it seems from the information that we've been provided today, but I am supportive of whatever we can do. And if it comes to the wildfire committee that I often testify to, I'm happy to put in some information and whatever I can do. It deserves a fix.
Then we have what seems to be a path forward. Thank you, Commissioner Buck, for those words. Rocky though this path may be, we'll begin discussing it on Thursday, and Commissioner Bozovich, maybe by next week we'll have something closer to an answer for you. Mr. Clark, thank you. Mr. Miller, thank you. Anything either of you would like to add before we call this one closed for the day?
Chair Farr,
negative. Then thank you very much. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Chair Farr, I'll be quick on this response. Just to Commissioner Buck, I just want to let you know that with respect to rebuilding in the F2 zone, the legislature has acted fairly quickly sometimes with regard to wildfires. And the law on wildfires is you can rebuild as long as you do it within 5 years, but that language is specific to destruction by wildfire, not regular fires or other destruction. So obviously it's very limited, but it can be done. While they haven't seen fit to do it everywhere, I cannot tell you, but that's the status. Thanks.
So it comes down to the legislative definition of wildfire then. Okay. Because the gentleman this morning said it was mice that caused this fire. That seems pretty wild to me, but anyhow, that's rhetorical. Then any more future board assignment requests? I see none. Mr. Mokraisi, a review of assignments, please.
Thank you, Chair. We just have the request from Commissioner Trieger, and I think hopefully I got it right here. It is to write and sign a letter in support of the ambulance transport company. Commissioner Trieger did forward the request, or I was copied on a response to that. So we have that as an assignment, and I believe Ms. Jones will take care of processing that request.
Thank you, Mr. Mokraisi. Then we have completed our need for executive session for this particular day. Do we have any other business before the Board of County Commissioners for this date? We do not. Then I'd like to say just this last thing. This last discussion we have was a pretty good discussion because I believe it, as Keir Miller said, it shed a little bit of light on something that has been very, very dim and hazy, and hopefully we'll get it closer to a position where people can be more certain about how to replace their burned down dwelling and have to plan for the future. So we didn't resolve anything, but we're moving in that direction. Mr. Clark, your hand is raised, and Commissioner Burney, yours is raising.
Sorry, just didn't put it down.
Okay, then Commissioner Burney.
I was just going to say that for some reason I'm feeling dim and hazy right now. That's all.
Then all that remains is adjournment. We will reconvene next Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock, which is not, excuse me, we'll reconvene Monday evening next week at 7 o'clock with the Springfield.
No,
Commissioner
I
Farr,
believe we're, yeah.
no.
You're right.
Yeah,
I'm as hazy as anybody. Let's say this. Hasta la vista. With that, Mr. Mokraski, to the board, thank you very much for today's business. We are adjourned.
Thank you.